Hi. I'm 32, a mom to a toddler, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had the kind of life people envied: beautiful house, loyal husband, doting family. That all changed with a single phone call. I should probably start with the fact that my mother and I have never had a perfect relationship. She's always been the suspicious type, always convinced people are hiding something from her. Growing up, I got used to her snooping through my diary, reading my texts, and interrogating my friends like it was normal. I always brushed it off as her being overprotective. When I got married to Mark, she barely hid her disapproval. Not because he did anything wrong, but because she couldn't shake the feeling that he was too good to be true. She never trusted how easily he fit into our lives. Still, Mark and I were happy. At least, I thought we were. He was gentle, reliable, and absolutely smitten with our son, Ben, who's now 2.5. We weren't perfect, who is, but I always believed our bond was strong enough to handle anything. Until my mom called, trembling and furious. She said she had something to tell me and I needed to sit down. I thought it was going to be about her health. Maybe a bad diagnosis or some emergency. Instead, she confessed something so bizarre, so out of bounds, that I honestly couldn't speak for a solid minute. She told me she had taken a DNA test. Not on herself. On Ben. She swabbed his mouth while babysitting him one afternoon and sent it in just to ease her mind. She said she had a feeling, whatever that means, and wanted to be sure he was Mark's biological child. I was speechless. Not only did she violate my son's privacy and our trust, but she also had no reason to do it. No suspicion, no warning signs. Nothing. Or so I thought. She kept saying the same thing over and over: you need to look at the results. I told her I didn't want to hear it, but she sent them anyway. A PDF. I opened it, and what I saw made my heart sink. The test showed that Mark wasn't a match. Not the father. My first thought was, this is wrong. It has to be. There's no way. I've never cheated on my husband, not once, not even emotionally. The timeline doesn't make sense. The math doesn't make sense. Nothing makes sense. I texted Mark to come home. I didn't say why. And I've been sitting here, staring at that PDF, for hours now, wondering, is there more to this than I realize? Or have I been living in someone else's lie? When Mark walked through the door, he looked like any other day, tired, smiling, loosening his tie with one hand while carrying groceries in the other. I stood there, holding my phone, and suddenly I couldn't meet his eyes. He asked what was wrong. I didn't answer right away. I just handed him the phone with the test results open and walked back to the couch, heart pounding so hard it felt like I was being crushed from the inside. He stood in silence for what felt like forever. Then he asked where it came from. I told him the truth. My mom had tested Ben. Without my knowledge. Without his. Without consent. She violated every boundary I thought we had. At first, I thought Mark would explode. But he didn't. His face went pale, like someone had just drained all the color from it. Then he sat down very slowly and asked me a question I wasn't expecting. He asked if I remembered the day Ben was born. Of course I remembered. I was in labor for 19 hours. It was chaos. The hospital was understaffed. The pediatric unit was overwhelmed. And when Ben came out, they whisked him away for routine checks so fast I barely got to hold him. He looked at me with this hollow expression and said, I never told you this, but I always had a weird feeling. When they brought him back in that swaddle, I felt like something was off. I laughed, at first, because it sounded like something out of a soap opera. But he wasn't smiling. He looked haunted. Then he told me something I'd completely forgotten. The hospital had a minor security alert that day. Some kind of ID mismatch in the newborn wing. We were told everything was fine, that it was a clerical error, and they were double-checking babies with wristbands and ankle tags. I remember thinking it was just an extra precaution. Hospitals mess up paperwork all the time. But now, it doesn't feel so harmless. Mark admitted he'd thought about it once or twice over the years. Mostly in passing. But the test my mom sent, that result brought it all back. He started pacing. Said maybe the test was real, and maybe it didn't mean what we thought it did. Maybe Ben wasn't just not his. Maybe Ben wasn't mine either. That idea hit me like a train. My throat closed. I hadn't even considered that. And now? Now that possibility is eating me alive. Because if Ben isn't Mark's, and I know I never cheated, then who is my son? I didn't sleep that night. I just kept staring at Ben while he slept, clutching his stuffed dinosaur like nothing was wrong in the world. I kept touching his hair, his little fingers, listening to his breathing. He was mine. I knew he was mine. My body remembered him. The weight of him in my arms the first time. The way he'd latched onto me in the hospital. The way he'd calmed when I sang to him even as a newborn. But suddenly none of that felt like proof. Mark and I sat in silence most of the night. We couldn't even argue. What was there to say? We were both too stunned. Too numb. The next morning, I called the hospital. I didn't even know what to ask. I just mumbled something about requesting birth records. The woman on the line sounded confused and asked if something was wrong. I said no. I just needed to see everything, every detail, every note from that day. She said it would take a few days to process. I could feel Mark watching me from the kitchen, rubbing his temples like he was trying to erase the entire situation from his mind. By the afternoon, my mom called again. I didn't answer. I couldn't bring myself to talk to her. Not yet. She opened a wound I wasn't even prepared to treat. Whether she had good intentions or not, she lit the match and walked away. Mark started pulling out photos from Ben's first year. He pointed at things like his nose, his ears, his toes, saying they looked like mine. Then like his. Then back to mine. He was grasping. I didn't stop him. We were both desperate for certainty. That's when he found a hospital bracelet tucked in the back of the baby book. I hadn't seen it in years. He held it up and asked, "Did you ever notice this number before?" It was the ID tag Ben wore at the hospital. And the number didn't match the one on my wrist in the photos from delivery day. At first, I told him it was nothing. Maybe they changed it after I was moved from labor to recovery. But the panic on his face told me he didn't believe that. And the more I looked at it, the more I didn't believe it either. Suddenly the question wasn't just, is Ben biologically Mark's? It was, is Ben biologically ours? And I can't even describe how terrifying that is. Because if he's not, then where's my child? The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I drove back to the hospital where I gave birth. I didn't call ahead. I didn't make an appointment. I just showed up. My hands were shaking the whole way there. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, or who I was going to demand answers from, but I had to see it. The building. The hallway. The place where everything started to feel wrong. Mark stayed home with Ben. I told him I needed to do this alone. He didn't argue. Walking through those doors was like stepping into another version of my life. Everything looked the same, calm, clean, normal. But now I felt like I was walking through a crime scene no one realized existed. I went to the records office and requested the full file again. This time, I pressed harder. I told them something felt off about the birth ID tags. The woman at the desk, older, maybe in her 50s, gave me a polite but clearly rehearsed smile and said they'd review and process everything promptly. Which felt like code for don't hold your breath. Frustrated, I wandered toward the maternity wing, like being near it would jog some buried memory or trigger something I'd missed. And that's when a nurse walked by. Mid-30s. Dark ponytail. She paused, looked at me, and asked if I needed help. I said no at first. Then she squinted and said, "Wait, weren't you here about 2.5 years ago? Emergency C-section, room 412? My breath caught. I had been in room 412. And the surgery was an emergency. Ben's heart rate had dropped and they rushed me in after 17 hours of labor. Everything had happened so fast. My memory of it was blurry at best. I nodded. Yeah, that was me. Her face shifted a little. Just slightly. She said she remembered because the baby's tag had been replaced that night. Something about a printer malfunction. I blinked. What do you mean, replaced? She said the original band printed at delivery didn't scan properly. So they made a new one. The first one was tossed. She said it wasn't a big deal, just paperwork. But suddenly that paperwork felt like everything. I asked if they ever logged those tag replacements in the baby's file. She paused, said she didn't know. Then offered to help me check. We walked back to the records desk, and after a quiet conversation with the receptionist, they both disappeared into a back room for nearly 30 minutes. When she came out, she handed me a printed report with trembling fingers. At the top was my name, the date of Ben's birth, time of delivery, surgery notes. But then there it was. A timestamp, 4 hours after delivery. Infant ID band replaced due to equipment error. Reprinted and verified manually by night staff. No details about who verified it. No signature. No initials. Just, replaced. I stared at that single line like it held the truth of my entire life. That's when the nurse leaned in and said, barely above a whisper, "You should request security footage from that night. If it still exists." She looked over her shoulder and added, "But do it fast." I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, staring at that printout. I read it over and over, thinking maybe I missed something. Some detail. A clue. A lifeline. But it was just a few typed lines, cold and vague, and it felt like the entire weight of my world was sitting on them. I called Mark and told him what I'd found. His voice cracked when I mentioned the ID band replacement. I could hear Ben playing in the background, laughing. And that laugh? It wrecked me. Because no matter what that piece of paper said, no matter what any future test or footage revealed, that laugh belonged to my son. And now I was terrified someone could take him away from me. Mark told me to come home, but I couldn't. Not yet. I had one more thing to do. I walked back into the hospital and asked for the security office. They were polite, at first, asked me to explain why I wanted footage from that night. I told them I believed there may have been a mix-up during my son's ID tagging after delivery, and that I'd been advised by a nurse to check the logs or camera feeds, if they still existed. Their faces changed instantly. Suddenly it wasn't so friendly. One of them asked, who was the nurse? I didn't answer. I wasn't about to get her in trouble. But I pressed harder, asking if footage was stored from 2.5 years ago. The older man behind the counter clicked around on a screen, then gave me a stiff smile. Said the hospital's system automatically overwrites footage every 90 days unless there's a formal incident logged. I asked if there was an incident logged the night my son was born. He hesitated. Then said no. No alerts. No incidents. Just the standard logs. Then he added, even if there had been, HIPAA wouldn't allow us to share that footage without a subpoena. That word hit me like a brick. Subpoena. This was no longer just a question of identity or paperwork. It was starting to feel like something deeper. Bigger. Like someone had made a mistake that night and covered it up. I left the hospital with a pit in my stomach. Called a lawyer before I even pulled out of the parking lot. Explained everything, my mother's unauthorized test, the ID discrepancy, the missing footage. The lawyer didn't sound surprised. Not even a little. She said, if your child was switched at birth, intentionally or not, and the hospital has no record of the mistake and no surveillance footage to verify anything, then you're in a very rare, very complicated situation. I asked what my options were. She said I needed a court-ordered DNA test for both Mark and myself. Not to confirm whether Ben is biologically ours, but to determine whether someone else's child might be out there, missing us the way we're missing him. And if that's the case, then the real question becomes, where is our biological child, and who has been raising him for the past 2.5 years? It took 4 days to get the court approval for the DNA test. 4 days of pretending everything was fine. 4 days of smiling through breakfast, playing with Ben, bathing him, reading bedtime stories, while this silent, crushing truth hovered over every moment. Mark barely slept. He stayed up each night, scrolling through forums, articles, any cases where a child was switched at birth. It didn't help. Most stories ended in heartbreak, legal battles, or years of confusion and guilt. I was doing the same. Secretly. Quietly. The test results came back faster than expected. Ben is not biologically related to either of us. Not even distantly. No half-match. No fluke. No lab error. The boy I carried out of the hospital, the one I nursed, the one I raised and loved for 2.5 years, is not our son. I don't know how to describe what it feels like to have your reality shattered like that. It's like the floor of your life drops out from under you and you're suspended in freefall, no idea where the bottom is. Mark broke down when we got the call. I didn't. I just sat there, staring at Ben's baby pictures, trying to make sense of how this could happen. How the system failed so completely. Our lawyer moved fast. She filed for hospital records on all male births during the 48-hour window around Ben's supposed birth time. There weren't many, only 4 other boys born in that time frame. One of those boys had the original ID number from Ben's wristband. We had a name. A family. They lived 45 minutes away. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel, anger? Hope? Fear? The hospital contacted them first. Carefully. Quietly. They were told there was a potential issue with their child's birth records and were asked to consider a DNA test to confirm the file details. They agreed. The test was expedited. No one wanted to drag this out any longer. I didn't think anything could shock me more than finding out Ben wasn't biologically mine. But what came next made my blood run cold. The hospital called us again. The boy they'd been raising? He's ours. Biologically, genetically, our son. And the boy I've been raising as my own? He belongs to them. 2 families. 2 children. Switched at birth. And now? Now we have to figure out what comes next. The hospital arranged it. A neutral location. No press. No lawyers present. Just the 2 families. They suggested a park, somewhere publicly calm, with space for the boys to play, unaware of the storm gathering around them. I don't remember getting dressed that morning. I barely remember the drive. Mark was silent the entire time, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. When we pulled up, the other family was already there. They looked like us. Normal. Nervous. The mother, Clara, stood holding a little boy's hand. He looked just like Mark. The same eyes. The same exact mouth. The resemblance was undeniable. My heart dropped. And next to her was the father, Jonas. Tall. Tired eyes. Holding a backpack full of toys. Our son's toys. Ben, their Ben, ran up ahead of us, giggling, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. He made a beeline for the playground like it was just another Saturday. Clara knelt down beside her son, our son, and whispered something. He looked over at us, confused, curious, not scared, just small. We approached slowly. No one spoke at first. We just stood there, taking in what none of us had words for. Then Clara reached out a hand and said, "Hi. I guess we've got something in common." I wanted to scream, cry, hug her, run. I felt everything and nothing all at once. We sat at a picnic table while the boys played. They didn't know. They didn't need to, not yet. She told me his name was Eli. I told her mine was Ben. And just like that, I realized I'd said it wrong. Ben wasn't my son's name. It was Eli's. And the little boy I raised, the one I had cradled through fevers, rocked to sleep, taught to count and say I love you. His name wasn't even Ben. It was Leo. Leo. Clara whispered it with a tremble in her voice like it hurt to say it. We watched them play together, like they'd known each other their whole lives. And maybe, in some way, they had. They were switched the day they were born. Raised by strangers. And now? They were standing side by side on a jungle gym, like they'd been waiting to meet. The four of us just sat there, silently unraveling. We didn't talk about lawyers. We didn't talk about custody. Not yet. We just watched. And I think we all knew. There's no right ending to this. Only damage control. Only heartbreak. Only the impossible choice none of us should ever have had to make. We stayed at that park for 3 hours. Not because we had anything figured out, but because no one wanted to say what we were all thinking. The boys played like they'd known each other forever. They didn't fight. They shared toys instinctively. It was like some invisible thread had been pulling them together this whole time. Watching them made everything harder. There was no room left for denial. These weren't just random kids. These were our sons. And yet, neither of them felt like strangers. Which, somehow, made it worse. At one point, Leo, my Leo, ran over and handed me a rock shaped like a heart. I kissed the top of his head without thinking. Clara saw. Her eyes welled up but she looked away. I couldn't breathe. Finally, Mark broke the silence. He said we needed to talk. Just the adults. So the four of us sat on a bench, facing each other, while the kids stayed within eyesight. That conversation? It was the hardest one of my life. Because there's no guidebook for this. No court ruling can teach you how to feel. Clara and Jonas were kind. Thoughtful. But they were also hurting. Just like we were. They admitted they'd suspected for a while that Leo didn't look much like either of them. But they brushed it off. Love has a way of blinding you, of making you believe what you need to believe. And they loved Leo. That was clear. Jonas said he was terrified of lawyers. That any official process would tear both boys apart. That splitting them up would feel like 2 deaths. Mark nodded. He felt the same. Then Clara asked the question we were all avoiding. What do we do now? No one spoke for a long time. Then I said something I never expected to hear from my own mouth. I think we should do a slow transition. Let the boys stay where they are, for now. Start with visits. Let them get used to both families, both homes. Don't rip them out of their worlds overnight. I could see the relief wash over Clara's face. But there was something else there too. Fear. Grief. Because the unspoken truth was still sitting between us. Eventually, we might have to give them up. Not permanently, maybe. But biologically, emotionally, legally, lines would need to be drawn. And no matter how gently we handled it, someone was going to feel like they were losing a child. Jonas suggested we meet once a week. Switch locations. Let the boys get familiar with everyone. Clara added that maybe one day, they could grow up like cousins. 2 families blended into one. I smiled. But inside, I felt like I was shattering. Because I wasn't ready to give Leo up. Not even for a second. And yet, I knew I might have to. The first few visits were fine. Too fine. The boys adjusted quickly, maybe too quickly. Leo would run into Clara's arms like he'd known her forever. Eli clung to me the same way Ben used to. It was like their instincts knew something their minds couldn't yet process. It should have comforted me, but it didn't. It scared me. At first, we kept it neutral. No sleepovers, no overnights. Just a few hours here and there, parks, homes, playdates. But last weekend, Clara asked if Leo could stay the night. Just once. A trial run. See how he handled it. I agreed. With a smile on my face and a scream in my chest, I said okay. Mark tried to be the calm one, but I could see the storm brewing in him too. He didn't sleep at all that night. Neither did I. I kept watching the clock, waiting for some text, a call, anything. But the silence? That was the worst part. Leo didn't cry. Didn't ask for us. Clara sent pictures, him smiling at the dinner table, curled up on the couch with a blanket I'd never seen before, asleep with a stuffed bear that wasn't his. When we picked him up the next morning, he was happy. Really happy. Too happy. He ran into my arms like nothing had changed, like he didn't notice we were missing from his bedtime routine. And then it happened. As we were leaving, he looked up at Clara and said, "Bye, Mommy." I froze. Everything in me shattered in that 1 second. She smiled, kind, apologetic, uncomfortable, but didn't correct him. Mark didn't say anything either. Just walked faster toward the car. I buckled Leo into his seat like I was on autopilot, fighting the sting behind my eyes. He chattered away the whole ride home, totally unaware that my heart had cracked in half. When we got back, I locked myself in the bathroom and finally cried. Because I'd known from the start this would happen. That he'd feel it. That deep down, something in him recognized her. But hearing it out loud? It felt like being replaced. Like losing something that had never truly been mine to begin with. And the worst part? I couldn't even be mad at him. He didn't know. He was just a child. But I did know. And now? Now I wasn't sure if I could keep doing this. Because slowly, week by week, it felt like I was being erased. I woke up the next morning to silence. Mark was already up, sitting in the living room, holding Leo's little stuffed dinosaur. The one he used to carry everywhere. He hadn't touched it in days. He looked up at me with tired eyes and said, "We can't keep doing this." And I knew exactly what he meant. We'd tried everything. We met the other family halfway. We took the slow route. We prioritized the boys' feelings. We kept our pain silent, buried under polite texts and scheduled visits. But it wasn't working. Because every time Leo ran into Clara's arms, I felt like I was losing a piece of him. And every time Eli kissed my cheek and said "Love you, Mommy," I felt like I was stealing someone else's child. We weren't blending families. We were slowly tearing two apart. The next visit, we sat across from Clara and Jonas and said it out loud. We needed to stop switching. Not permanently. Not forever. But we needed to stabilize. For the boys. For us. We proposed this. Each child stays with the family that raised them, for now. Legally, emotionally, practically. That becomes home base. That becomes the constant. And as they grow, we tell them the truth. Carefully. Lovingly. We keep the door open, always. But we let them feel secure. Like they belong. Clara cried. So did I. But not out of anger. Not even grief, really. It was something else. Relief. It didn't feel like giving up. It felt like choosing love over chaos. We signed paperwork. Joint guardianship. Shared medical decisions. No custody battles. No courtrooms. Just trust. And then we walked out of the lawyer's office, holding hands with the wrong children that somehow became our own. Leo is still here. Still calling me Mommy. Still sleeping with that dinosaur clutched to his chest. He has Clara's eyes, Jonas's laugh, and my heart. Forever. And I still see Eli. Not every day. Not as much as I want. But he hugs me like he remembers something. Like he knows there's a piece of me in him. And maybe, one day, we'll tell them the whole truth. How one moment in a hospital changed 4 lives. How 2 babies became brothers in every way that mattered. How biology doesn't always decide who we love. But for now, I hold Leo tighter. I whisper I love you louder. And I let go of the guilt. The confusion. The ache. Because this is the life I chose. And he chose me back.